Hello and welcome to another TLDR UK video. There's a lot going on in the world, from the ongoing pandemic and vaccine rollouts to the economic fallout and the need to reopen education institutions. You'd think that the governing party and political realm would be all consumed by these major era-defining issues, and, well, you'd be wrong. In recent months and years, the Conservative government and the wider right wing of the UK politics have become increasingly concerned by what they call woke culture. So let's take a look at what's gaining so much attention and ire: the government's new free speech champion at universities and their wider war on woke. Before we start, we're running a special promotion with our Patreon. Every backer, new or old, above $10, gets one of these exclusive golden TLDR pin badges. They're never going to be for sale, so if you want yours, you have to sign up this month. On top of the pin, you'll get all of your usual perks: early access to videos, thanks in videos, behind the scenes post, the ability to vote on topics, exclusive live events, and more. And the satisfying feeling of knowing that you're supporting independent, unbiased news content. Anyway, the link for all of that's in the description. So last weekend, the Sunday Telegraph reported that the government would be announcing a new free speech champion for universities, because, like many on the right, they believe that universities stifle free speech in favour of political correctness. Now, if you pay attention to the news at all, you probably won't be surprised by this attempt to rebalance, because the government has done a lot of talking about so-called culture war issues recently. In the last few weeks, Priti Patel described the BLM protests as, quote, dreadful. Housing Secretary Robert Jenrick vowed to save Britain's statues from woke militants who want to censor our past by tweaking planning laws so that the National Community Secretary would have to approve any planned statues removal, as well as a backbench group of MPs who describe themselves as the Common Sense Group, who've set out a plan to rename Diversity Grove and Equality Road in Birmingham after holders of the Victoria Cross. Anyway, all of this has formed part of what media commentators have labelled the government's war on woke. One of the key elements of this war, as we've already mentioned, was the Sunday Times report that we'll be getting a new free speech champion for universities, and that Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden has called a meeting with 25 heritage groups, including the National Trust and British Museum, apparently to talk to them about airbrushing history. We thought this was an interesting thing to talk about, because A, it's unclear what powers this new champion will have, and B, some of us at TLDR are currently at university, so we thought it was an appropriate topic to tackle. Before we get into it though, I think we need to stress the obvious. We're a neutral channel, so we're not going to take a side on any of the free speech on campus stuff, and instead just try and explain the government's plans and what they're trying to achieve. So what exactly will the so-called free speech champion be doing? Well, on Tuesday, the government published their full report on it, which we'll be linking in the description. Broadly, it contains 4 proposals. The proposals are probably best separated into 3 legislative proposals and 1 political proposal. The legislative proposals would involve a significant change to legislation, whereas the political proposal might not actually make that much difference legally speaking, but is more about pointing the political spotlight on the whole freedom of speech on campus debate. Let's start with the legislative ones. First and most importantly, students' unions will be put under the jurisdiction of the Office of Students. Currently, under the Higher Education and Research Act of 2017, only universities themselves, not unions, are registered with the Office for Students, and therefore have to abide with free speech legislation as described by Section 43 of the Education Act of 1986. Currently, most students' unions are registered as charities with the Charities Commissioner, but crucially not with the OFS. The proposal is to put students' unions, like universities, under the jurisdiction of the OFS, so they'd have to abide by Section 43 and its free speech provisions. If they fail to do this, the OFS could impose fines and ultimately deregister them. The second legislative proposal is to introduce what's called a statutory tort for Section 43 breaches. That sounds legal and complicated, but basically the idea is to provide a means for redress for individuals who have suffered some sort of free speech related discrimination. The report says this will cover students who were disciplined because of their views, e.g. expelled from their course, organisers who had an event cancelled, visiting speakers who were disinvited or no-platformed, and academic staff who were disciplined because of their views. The third legislative proposal is about providing contractual protections for academic freedom, and is essentially about making sure academics aren't unfairly discriminated against for holding what the report describes as lawful but perhaps controversial or unpopular views. Now, there is already legislation for this kind of thing, the Employer Rights Act of 1996 and the Equality Act of 2010, but the Equality Act doesn't explicitly cover discrimination for holding unpopular political views, so maybe that's what the government's trying to cover here. Those are the legislative proposals. On to what we'll call the political proposal. This is the new free speech champion, which the Sunday Telegraph report got all excited about. The free speech champion, whose job title will be the Free Speech and Academic Freedom Champion, will be a member of the OFS board. We're calling this a political change because it makes no substantial legal difference. It involves no change to the OFS regulations or legislation, and as the report admits, the OFS board already has a member who plays a similar role in the Director for Fair Access and Participation. So the only real difference here is that the Free Speech Champion has a sexier and more clickable title, so it got the newspapers all excited. Anyway, those are the government's new free speech proposals for universities, and what they're planning to do to make universities less woke. As a last thing, we thought we should address whether this really is an issue. The media loves endless headlines about some speaker or other who was cancelled or deplatformed from a university or other institution, but it's hard to find reliable, data-informed conclusions about these sorts of sensationalist headlines. Luckily, there has been some academic and polling work done, which reveals an interesting disconnect between the public and students. A lot of people, students included, think that freedom of speech is under threat in the UK, or at least is getting worse. A Savanta Comres poll done for Lawrence Fox's Reclaim Party found that 49% of Brits felt they were less free to say what they want compared to 5 years ago, and that only 12% of people thought they were more free to say what they want. Add to this, 50% of people thought that free speech was under threat, while only 24% thought it was safe. A Policy Institute poll from December 2019 found that while students do basically agree with the general population on this one, with 51% of students agreeing that freedom of expression was threatened in the UK, interestingly, only 22% thought it was threatened in their universities. In fact, 63% said that free speech and robust debate was well protected at their university, and only 12% of students say that they've heard about their university inhibiting free speech. Basically, a lot of people, both in the general public and students, think that freedom of speech is under threat. In fact, students and the general public agree on most questions when it comes to freedom of expression. But the public, and apparently the government, are more likely to blame this on universities clamping down on free speech. That doesn't mean that the general public are wrong. It could be that they consider certain things as threats to free speech, which students don't consider as a threat. But it certainly is interesting that there's a disconnect here. So that's the government's latest step forward in the war on woke, taking steps to tackle issues that they've identified on university campuses. But do you think the government is doing enough, or are they trying to fight a non-existent battle? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.